Hey, welcome. How you doing? My name is Tom Baker, and I'm the co-founder, research director. I wear lots of hats at the Brain Triage Initiative. We also operate a in-person brain training clinic in Kansas City. This webinar will last for about an hour. I'll try to take questions, but typically we run overtime, so if you ask a question, I promise that someone will answer it. I may not answer it right away, but by email we'll try to get back to you as soon as we can. If we have lots of questions, we'll just put together a FAQ section and send it to everybody. So today, you're giving me your valuable time, and in return, I want to give you something significant that changes your daughter's life. And if for some reason I don't do that, I really want to know about it. I know that situations are complex, and kids are complex, and families are complex, but I really want to give you something that you really feel to be is substantial. We're going to talk in case study formats. We'll talk about roadblocks, we'll talk about solutions, we'll talk about resources that you can get from us and resources that you can get from other sources. First, a little bit about me. I'm the father of three. Actually, this picture is from a couple years ago. That's back when my teenage son actually liked me. I think he'll like me again in a few years, but we've been having some issues. You are the parent of typically daughters age 6 to 16. You have, the reason you're here is because you've got concerns about inattention symptoms, maybe at home, maybe from teacher. Most of you have had symptoms in more than one subject for more than one semester. And we all share the same long-term goals, and that's for our daughters to be happy, healthy, self-confident, and self-sufficient. We know it tends to take any number of steps for that to happen, but we're really less concerned about their grades or where they go to college or what they do for a job, but we really want at the center of their core for them to be happy people. And so I have to start out with you with some not great news, and I know you hate seeing these United States versus rest of the world ranking reports. But this talks about, this was a 2007 survey, telephone survey of families that had adolescents age 14 to 18 worldwide, and they asked about symptoms of mental obstacles, emotional obstacles. So it wasn't whether they'd been diagnosed or not, or whether they were treating medication or not, but simply if they had visible symptoms. And so, excuse me a second. I have to drink of water. And you can see there are actually a couple that were lower. Like the survey of People's Republic of China had a very low rate, but we presume that's because people don't like answering telephone surveys. So going from Italy to Colombia, we're just a percentage point above Colombia that's in the midst 30-year drug war. And so the combination of anxiety, depression, ADHD, and substance abuse affects the symptoms are there in over half of our kids. This next slide shows the age of onset, and this is North American kids. This may be hard for you to see. It's scale on the left is 0 to 40. Ages along the bottom are 4 to 18. The red marker on top is anxiety. Blue is behavior, ADHD. Green is depression. Purple is alcohol abuse. And what's interesting about that is note where the big jumps come, and depending on what we're looking at, the jumps tend to correspond with increases in school accountability changes. For example, going from kindergarten to first grade, going into middle school, or going into high school. That's when those biggest jumps tend to occur. So the trends are, if a child is frustrated today, it's likely to be worse in 5 years. It's I suppose possible that things will take care of themselves, but it's rare that they do. If there's a problem now, there's probably going to be a problem in 5 years, and it's probably going to be worse. So I talked in my email about 3 mistakes that families make, and in this situation, and one is just allowing themselves to get exhausted, both the parents and the kids. And I say this in full confession that I do the same thing in my family. My son right now is doing 3 different things, extracurricular activities. Each is a really good thing, but the combination is just too much. And and his mother is an educator and his father is a brain scientist. We should know better. We should know not to do that. We say it's for a short term, and so we let it go. But I just really wonder what kind of message we're sending. And talk about same patterns. The same thing happened last year in 7th grade, so it's not like it's a surprise to us. The number 3, and I'm going to talk a lot about this today. The third mistake is kind of the lure of false success, and that kids are struggling, parents intervene, schools intervene. It appears to make an improvement, but it doesn't actually get at the underlying causes. Yet, as symptoms improve, that tends to reduce the pressure and the urgency to find a long-term solution. But I have to tell you, even though the symptoms are changing, the underlying problems are still there. So we think there's a better option, and that's a growth plan. And I'll talk about the details of what that looks like. Most of the people on this broadcast are going to want to consider a growth plan. I think there's a category of people, and maybe it's 5%, but it's I get asked this question a lot about homeschooling. If it's in your heart to homeschool, then you should do it. If you think you can't figure out the curriculum or you're not sure what to do, that's almost never a problem. So if you really want to do it, then you should do it. If you feel like you're being painted into a corner and that homeschooling is your only option, you're probably not going to be very satisfied with that. Those situations don't come out very well. So I've got some case studies today, and at the risk of reading my PowerPoints to you, not everyone, see, I can see whether you've got your display on me or whether you've got something else in the foreground working on your email. So let me read this to you. I just pulled these off of the registration forms for today, and these are situations that parents, I think most of these have middle school or high school daughters. These are things that you're worried about. Staying positive in school when things get tough, thinking positive about herself. We've tried natural vitamins, diet changes, and counseling. My son, thank goodness for a boy in this mix, has a hard time focusing and grasping some concepts. We think he may have ADD. We've not tried drugs yet, just tutoring, and he has an IEP. It's helping, but he's still behind. Different case is low self-esteem due to repeated failure at school and with friends. We've tried encouragement, breaking tasks into smaller time frames. Medication works pretty well on my daughter, but I want for her to develop other skills and coping mechanisms. Another parent writes, consistent energy drain, slow progress in school, frustration level. I tried tutoring, medication, private school, etc. Here's one with my daughter and me, are suffering from homework, project delivery, reading, and writing errors. That our daughter may have inattentive ADD and has challenges socially, getting ready to enter high school. We have an appointment in June with a neuropsychologist specializing in ADHD. Then finally, finding ways to help her enjoy learning, get the things done we need to get done, and encourage her natural curiosity and creativity without having every day just be play and projects. We homeschool. So keep those cases in mind. I'm going to run through the rest of our presentation, and we'll come back to those at the end. So features of a growth plan. It covers the whole child. It covers the long term. It goes step by step and has an emphasis on building strength. You can use our online tools. You can build your own if you'd like. You'll have enough information from today's broadcast. If you want to build your own growth plan, that's great with us. If you're using our online tools, you'll get expert support via email. It's $20 a month, and there's no contracts. You can take 1 month or 6 months, whatever you think you need to build your growth plan. We have other services. You can upgrade to one-on-one support. That'll be personal support. We have brain training programs and a couple different versions of that, some with parents coaching, some with computers coaching, and some with students and parents coaching each other. For kids old enough, typically middle school and above, we have study skills coaching. All of our expert support programs are one-on-one, and they're online using a Skype or this type of interface. And if you're interested in one of these upgrades, you can email my wife or myself for details. So again, a growth plan is whole child, long-term, step-by-step, and strength-based. So let's define a whole child. And I'm a member of a group called IMBUS, International Mind, Brain, and Education Society. It's the collaboration primarily out of Harvard, but universities worldwide that talks about the transdisciplinary nature of student growth and development. And so rather than thinking of kids as a collection of specialties, instead of thinking of mind, brain, health, and education as isolated specialties, we think it's more important how those parts fit together. Kurt Fisher at Harvard has been the driving force behind this, but like I said, there are a lot of people worldwide that are pushing it now. So by mind, I include things, how we think, how we feel, self-esteem, self-efficacy, which is an important distinction I'll cover sometime, autonomy and motivation. And we think of M as more than the treatment of illness, that someone can have low autonomy and not be ill. Someone can have low motivation and not be ill. It's quite possible that low autonomy and low motivation may lead to illness in the future, but by traditional terms, it doesn't fit the diagnosis. So by brain, we mean just like athletes have physical muscles to throw a touchdown pass in the fourth quarter, brains have mental muscles. A brain cell isn't like a muscle cell, but for the metaphor, think of brain muscles like working memory, processing speed, fluid reasoning, and executive function. There are a dozen brain skills in the traditional model, and some models have up to 80, and you don't want that unless you're a graduate student. So the H and E components of MBHE are health includes both physical, just not having liver disease. It also includes physical safety, emotional safety, and environmental safety. So if you live next to a toxic factory, that's going to have impact on kids' development as a whole child. Then the education part, you're familiar with the components of that because these are the same things that are on the report card that comes home every 9 weeks. Reading, math, writing, science, spelling. As they get older, college major, and when they start the job, building their professional skills. So historically, we've tended to focus on E factors, education factors. I'm going to say M, B, H, and E lots of times during this broadcast, like you know what those acronyms are. But so M is mind, B is brain, H is health, and E is education. Well, E elements are easier to see, and society pays a teacher 5 days a week, 7 hours a day to look at E factors. You get report cards. When you were a kid, you got report cards. When your grandparents were kids, they got report cards. So it's part of our tradition that we invest a lot of time and money on building E elements. The grading scale, A through F, goes back to pioneer days. So why is the whole child more important to you? Because, well, she's the sum of her parts and then some. You know, she's not just an M or a B or an H or an E put together. She's much more than that. And this is really important, that growth and happiness are something different than being not sick. And so clearly if you are sick, getting better is a step to well-being, but it's not the whole step altogether. And we think that well-being is more important than test scores or politics, and we can't escape No Child Left Behind, but there probably isn't very much you or I as an individual can do to change it, so we have to live within that. So we want to concentrate on what we can change, and what we can change are MBHE factors within this little girl. So our view of growth planning is compared to historically what families do, manage symptoms with medical through the doctor, manage grades with accommodations, manage day-to-day homework with just brute force, square peg and round hole. And if we've got 3 hours, then we invest 3 hours. And in some cases, actually we heard one of our case studies, we try to escape frustrations by changing schools. So here's where it gets tricky in that most of these short-term bridges, medications, accommodations, brute force, it appears to work. If you stay up until midnight flashcarding spelling words, you can probably get a better score than if you didn't do that. And so it tends to reward that behavior because it appears to work. And in some cases, I'm not 100% against meds. I've seen cases where medication therapy has been life-saving. I don't think that's true in most cases, but I think there are a significant number of kids that would be a lot worse off if they didn't have ADD meds. Yet, those same things that help in the short term can be crippling in the long term if they're allowed to persist. And some easy metaphors on that. If kids get pain meds, opiates from after they break their leg. It'd be cruel not to give them pain relief right when they're in the middle of a broken leg. Later they'll have the bone set, they'll get a cast, they'll go on crutches, and it's pretty easy for parents to appreciate that when the cast comes off, the muscles aren't as well worked, it's going to hurt to walk, and it might be easier today to leave the crutches on, but we know at some point for the kids' legs to get strong and for them to be able to use all their muscles, not just their leg muscle, you're going to have to go through a little bit of discomfort. And almost no parent would leave their kid on physical crutches, but it seems the rule that we leave kids on mental crutches, sometimes for the rest of their lives. And like I say, regardless of some of the negative things I'm going to tell you about medication and about 504 accommodations, that really shouldn't be the deciding factor in what you decide to do with your child. So it's okay to use short and long-term planning. In fact, in most cases, you're probably going to need to do that. But you have to remember the system isn't going to change, at least not while your child is still a child. These biases and myths and corruptions in the system I'm going to tell you about are going to be there. You have to work around them rather than waiting for them to change. And if you get too worried about it, you're wasting your energy on things you can't change, and that's energy you could be investing in things that could change. So if you've been on a previous broadcast, I don't know that I've got anyone registered who's been on all four of mine. So if you'd like, I can send you slides on this. These tend to be a little bit more research-oriented. But we talk in general about brain growth. We talk about myths of ADD meds. We talk in detail about 504 accommodation plans, and we talk about the long-term cancer, I don't think is too strong a word, of academic stress. So as an alternative to growth planning, you can react, symptom arises and you deal with it, and day to day, week to week, sometimes year to year. I knew 11 months ago that we were going to get in this jam in May of 2014. I didn't do anything about it. So it is true, and this is interesting, that just been looking at brain scans, that about 1 out of 4 ADD kids, their brains figure it out, and 5 years down the road, you can't see any brain scan signs of attention issues. So it is possible that 1 out of 4, you have a 25% chance of the problem taking care of itself, but you also have a 75% chance that it won't. And the reality is that I didn't say 100 because I would, but I can't think actually of anyone who didn't fall into this. All of our clients woke up one day and realized that they were in a pattern of reactions. That there's no problem with reacting. You should react. You're a good parent. All parents react. The hard part is figuring out when you're in that pattern of reactions where the things that you're doing to resolve the response, to respond to the event, aren't particularly helping in the long term. And probably about 2/3 of the families we deal with, one parent or the other has. When you ask them about it after the fact, they say, "Yeah, my intuition was going. My alarm bells are going off way before I talked to you." And oftentimes before even the other parent has detected the pattern. So you can react, or you can redefine that the symptoms are a chronic illness, that in fact they can't be. It's like diabetes or asthma or CF, that you can't cure it, and therefore the most humane thing is just treat it as a palliative case and do whatever you can to reduce the symptoms. So we're going to talk about medication management, and again, I know a lot about research into medication, but I'm not a doctor, and so the things that I tell you really should inform you, but they should not be the majority influence on what you decide to do with your child. You should talk to your doctor, and you and your doctor should work together to come up with a suitable plan. If you don't like your doctor, and you might not after you hear some things I have to say, you shouldn't quit all doctors. You should get a better doctor. As a result, in the last 7 years, because I work with a lot of pediatricians in Kansas City, we changed our pediatrician because of the way this particular doctor, I won't name names, handled our child's care. So I think it's pretty well accepted that stimulant meds change behavior in 2 out of 3 kids, and sometimes if you tweak it, you can get that up to 75 or 80%. They change behavior in a way that's enough to be visible to either teachers or to parents. Medical management assumes that learning challenges are primarily medical, and that changing behavior is likely to cure the learning challenges, or it assumes that they're incurable, and so therefore you have to treat it as a chronic illness. So from our medication webinar, we go into more depth on this, but in 1999 this was called the gold standard, then in 2007 it was ignored by pharmaceutical companies because they didn't like the results. But this was sponsored by the NIH. It covered 1,400 some kids over 8 years, and it carefully measured their responses to different treatment methods, including medication, including therapy, including medication and therapy, including no treatment. So when they looked at those 4 groups, it's Dr. Pelham from Buffalo, he said that we thought that medicated children would have better outcomes, and that did not happen to be the case. There were no beneficial effects of medication treatment, none. In the short term, medication will help the child behave better. In the long run, it won't, and that information should be made very clear to parents. Now, I should comment that over 8 years, lots of things happened to 1,400 kids. Some kids got better, some kids got worse. And so what he's saying here is that statistically, whether they were on meds or not on meds, didn't have an impact on whether they had good or worse outcome at the end of 8 years. The same study, when they announced results at 14 months, showed very clear benefits to kids in behavior terms, in terms of taking meds. So the improvements that were visible at 14 months started to wane at 36 months, and some of the side effects were more pronounced at 36 months. And then by 84 months, the initial benefits were no longer visible statistically. It's a similar profile in Canada, 1,400 kids, little evidence for improved academic performance. 2005, Oregon Public Health did a survey. And again, while behaviors improve, there is no quality evidence that use of drugs changed outcomes related to academic performance, consequences of risky behaviors, or social achievements. 2012, the New York Times quoted a professor from the University of Minnesota that drugs work in the short term. Over long periods of time, they neither improve school achievement nor reduce behavior problems. I don't know that I would agree with that second phrase. I do agree about school achievement. To date, no study has found any long-term benefit of medication on academic performance, peer relationships, or behavior problems. I think he's talking in behavior problems in terms of making bad choices, for example, substance abuse, alcohol, drugs, teen pregnancy in the long term. Same story, July of 2013 in the Wall Street Journal. You probably don't have copies of this in the lobby of your pediatrician's office. I think the pharmaceutical reps have done a pretty good job of scouring copies of these. Now, there are studies that support the long-term use of ADD meds. In 2012, Dr. Shaw from Shire funded a study and reviewed long-term outcomes for more than 2 years. And so he found 29 studies that had favorable outcomes on some measure or another. So it wasn't necessarily on all measures or significant measures, but at least in some measure they found improvements, versus 20 reports of no benefit or worse outcomes for treated ADD. And so Dr. Shaw concluded that ADD treatment improves long-term outcomes compared with untreated ADD. I think where Shire Pharmaceutical manufactures Vyvanse, Adderall, and Intuniv worldwide, these stimulant drugs represent a $40 billion marketplace. Well, maybe girls do better than boys. In fact, that's not the case. In fact, it's even a little bit worse. And this is a 10-year study from Berkeley, and it looked at measuring six different areas of functioning and well-being. They found that 88 non-ADHD girls had a 8 out of 9 chance of a positive outcome. So 88% of those girls measured over those 6 scales had a chance of a positive outcome. The odds were almost reversed for girls, for 8-year-olds who were diagnosed, comparing their 18-year-old outcomes. And 8-year-olds had a 1 in 6 chance of a positive outcome compared to 8 out of 9 for non-ADHD. And most troubling, we get into this more in our other webinar, I don't know that there's enough evidence to prove this. I also don't know that I do know there's not enough evidence to disprove it. And so the fact that we still don't know, but that we're giving antidepressants and antipsychotics to pediatric cases, there's at least a plausible mechanism by which treating those kids with those non-stimulant drugs may be responsible in some way for creating a lifelong disability. So in 1988, the year that Prozac was released, there were fewer than 10,000 kids on disability for mental health. Now, as of 2007, there were over 500,000. Just by comparison, I tell my grad students that in '88, we had telephones and computer. The telephones had wires on the wall, hooked to the wall, but it wasn't exactly the dark ages. And over that same period of time, we've cut, for example, pediatric cancer rates in half. Yet we have this explosion, this epidemic in disabling serious psychiatric illnesses that also correspond to the number of kids that are treated with antidepressants. So back a little happier side. A growth plan, again, whole child, long-term, step-by-step, and strength-based. But when we look at medication, it's symptom-driven. It treats behaviors. If it's effective, it's only effective in the short term. There are physical side effects, which we haven't really talked about, like weight loss and insomnia. There are psychological side effects, and many of the side effects are delayed. And finally, to us, instead of emphasizing strength, it places an emphasis in the child's mind on chronic weakness. Something about your brain is broken, you're not wired right, you're going to be like this for the rest of your life, and I'm just not crazy about that, as you can tell. Here's a case study. AJ's 13. He was a client here in Kansas City. He was a phenom, a soccer star from the day he walked onto the pitch. Although as he got older, the difference between his skills and other players tended to diminish as weaker players tended to quit soccer, as they do. He's still a good player, but he's just not 3 times. He's 10% better than most of his competitors, and there are now other players on the pitch that are faster and stronger than he is. He's been taking meds since kindergarten. He's underweight. He has sleep issues, yet he goes to elite workouts at his soccer club from 8 until 10:30. He gets home a little bit before 11. Tells us he can't go to sleep until 12 or 1 o'clock, but he has to get up for school at 7:05. I asked his parents 4 or 5 times about stimulants, and they said, well, the side effects are worth it because he can't function in school without his meds. Well, it's also possible he can't function in school because he's not going to sleep, and at this point, it's really hard to dissociate one or the other. I'm not saying he doesn't have attention issues. I'm saying that the side effects from the sleep deprivation are certainly making it worse. And the other comment, and this is almost blaming the victim, we try to make him eat, but he refuses. Well, of course he refuses. He's 13. He's not hungry. He doesn't like parents telling him what to do. I had dinner the other night with Ken Weaver, who's the new dean of the education school at Emporia State in Central Kansas, and we're talking about this and talking about in some communities, I think it's North Carolina, 1 out of 3 adolescent males have been diagnosed as ADHD. I think nationally it's like 1 out of 4. So, I asked him, are we getting to the point where so many kids and so many future parents will have been diagnosed as ADD and be taking medication for ADD that they think that it's normal, that they think that that's a good solution? And I said, is that going to just kind of weave itself into our national fabric over the next 10 years as these kids become parents? He looked at me and said, no, I don't think it will. I think it already has. So next option, we can manage grades and test scores with a 504 plan, and like I said, we had a webinar on this. 504 is a federal law. It's defined as modifying curriculum to improve test scores, getting extra time on tests, getting copies of the teacher's handouts, having fewer spelling words. It's definitely useful in a short-term crisis situation. Student has an eye injury. It would be cruel not to give them books on tape to do that. However, 504s are unfunded, and so depending on the school district, you can get a little or a lot of resistance from teachers and administrators, and that resistance is a lot worse at the collegiate level, although they're still technically required to follow the law. The hoops you have to jump through to do that are significantly worse. So I use the metaphor of, in the long term, of giving kids books on tape, giving blind students books on tape versus teaching them Braille. And the books on tape gets them through the history class, but teaching them Braille allows them to read in any class. So there's been almost no research on 504. The law was enacted before any research was out, which often happens in Washington. There have been 201 studies in that period of time, and you might think that that's a lot, but over that same period there have been 1.1 million studies on reading scores. These studies described 149 accommodations, but they only measured the impact of 9, and of those 9 measured accommodations, like taking extra time on tests, there was either no or, in several cases, negative evidence that it was incrementally beneficial. So Dr. Harrison concluded that across the country, multiple accommodations are being recommended every day almost without any evidence that this is effective. So it has costs in 3 important areas. One is that it costs students in terms of their long-term potential. It costs teachers time and fatigue and time they could be investing in other areas beneficial to their class, investing in things that are unlikely to work. And it costs taxpayers the resources that we have to provide to do this. Versus we look at a growth plan and we want that to be whole child, we want it to be long term, we want it to be step by step, and we want it to be emphasize building strength. Whereas 504 plans typically only target test scores. They're only effective if effective is defined as getting better test scores. Their side effects in terms of future performance. You would think that everyone would understand that if you only get 10 spelling words a week when everyone else is getting 20, that after 10 weeks you've only learned 100 spelling words, not 200. And so it may be helpful and may be necessary in the short term to cut down your workload while you're trying to figure out a longer term plan. Fine with that. What becomes problematic is where other kids are getting twice as much work done each year as the child that's being accommodated. And again, it sends the message to the kid that you can't do this, so we're going to have to make it easier for you. This is one, I cover this in more detail. This is especially troubling and tragic in my mind because, this girl, she was 23 when we met her, spent her whole life doing what grown-ups ask her to do. She had a history of meds and accommodations. She was evaluated at the University of Kansas by their specialists, and they recommended accommodations and meds. Yet they recommended this at a time where she'd already had all of her classwork done, and what she wasn't able to get done were her practicum credits, student teaching credits. And she failed not once but 3 times at that. And the last failure just had a blistering critique from the her department chair, and he ended up with saying that his biggest criticism of her was she had a false sense of success. Well, of course she did. She spent the last 16 years being told she was doing fine when she wasn't doing fine, and when she finally gets out in the classroom, reality kicks her in the gut. Now, I don't think she should be a teacher. I think she should be a terrible teacher. But the university kept cashing her tuition checks, and apparently didn't notice that she was on the wrong track until 6 years into the game. So the variation on 504 is called IEPs, and I could take a month grad student time on this, but just in brief, that IEPs are legally binding where 504s are not. IEPs do receive federal funds. There are turf issues at each level along the way. There's something called RTI that's going on now behind the scenes that possibly could be a step in the right direction. It's not currently, but I think it has potential to improve things. And of course, IEPs are individual education plans, E-plans. They're not MBHE plans. Their goal is to improve reading and math scores so that no child gets left behind. And for the most part, they work around, not on, MB and H obstacles. I will say that there are cases, some school districts actually do invest in some B and H remedial training, so I don't want to throw everybody under the bus. But depending on the school district, particular types of kids, some districts do a very good job with autistic kids, with behavior disorders, and with health issues. In terms of building cognitive skills, that's other B issues that almost never happens. So the brute force option, homework purgatory there. I didn't want to curse on national broadcast. School's a prison camp. Yeah, you know this. Compared to a growth plan. So brute force only targets homework completion. It's effective in the short term. Left over time, it can spill over into sports and church and social and free play. I have a client. She's a professor at medical school. She had been a client 2 years ago, and she called me up and said, "Tom, I can't believe what I've done. We've gotten into the..." So I understand how it happens, and it's easy to get into. It's just not something we can do for the long term. Hiring a tutor for 2 weeks or maybe even 2 months is fine. Hiring a tutor for more often than that, it's expensive for one thing, and it has some negative long-term effects. I had a 14-year-old 8th grader. She's about 85 pounds. She was on the adult max dosage of Vyvanse. Her father is a physician, although not peds. Their meds didn't work, so they increased it. That didn't work, so they turned up the heat on the daughter. The daughter's desperately trying to keep up. Parents tried 2 out of 6 months here, and they missed their coaching sessions once because they had a couples massage. And when they left, they said, "Well, we just can't let her fail. Her self-esteem's already too low. That we'll just have to tutor her through high school." And I just wonder what is going to happen with this little girl when she's out of high school. She'll go to college. She'll have a tutor. But again, it's going to keep being her work, and it's not going to be good enough for her parents. It's going to be embarrassing to them, right? So if you hate school, then we're going to give you more school. Let's see, we won't talk about that. So in our webinar about neuroplasticity, we go in the science behind brain training. I'm running behind schedule here, so I'm going to jump through these. There is research. It's not black and white, but it's pretty cool, and if you want, come to that webinar. So changing schools, this happens a lot, moving to private school, and that'll work if the original obstacle was an E issue, only to that school. Wealthier districts do have more reading and especially autism specialists, so there are cases where it makes sense. But if you're going to change, you need to get it right, because it's not good for the kid to change yet again. Variation of that is demanding extra services from school, and because they are legally required to provide these things, parents get, sometimes angry and borderline abusive, pounding the table, trying to get, because it's legally required. Well, the problem with that is that they can afford to delay, but you can't, and so if it becomes adversarial, even if you're right, even if you're 99.9% right, you're still wrong because they're going to win. They're going to run out the clock. Now, sometimes individuals within the system will change, and so it's worth asking, and maybe asking again. But if you've asked politely twice and nothing's happening, then it's not going to be the case that a third request is going to change anything. Even if you fight for demands, even year to year in the same school, it's rare to get things completely transferred from one grade to the next. You also get, it's called cum file, you also get comments that you were high maintenance in the, you never see these files, but they're in the principal's office. There's less carryover at middle school and high school, almost none to the college or the job. If you need to wear them down, do it with cookies and brownies, not with outrage. You may have good reason to be outraged, but that's not going to work. You attract more flies with honey. I have one student in Arizona, I think. I went to an experimental magnet. He was expertly diagnosed in third grade with dyslexia and ADHD, but I looked at the report and it didn't actually look like dyslexia. I think this expert did get a lot of referrals from this magnet school and perhaps felt pressured to come up with an explanation, that the explanation that it wasn't bad teaching that caused the kid to be behind. So the kid ended up with extensive accommodations, extra time, books on tape. Then in 5th grade, he transfers to 6th grade to an elite middle school, which has a huge bump in homework demands. The accommodations continue, and his mother was willing to invest hours upon hours every night on homework. And then the kid complains he can't remember facts in his literature from audiobooks. Well, of course he can't. I can't. You can't. As work gets more complex, you need the ability to look back and see where if you're looking for something nuanced, you have to be able to look back and find it. Yet he's dyslexic, but he decodes math problems fine, and he says because he's good in math. So it's entirely plausible that the reason he's not good in reading is because no one asks him to read. The same reason I'm not very good in golf is because I don't practice golf. So dyslexia is a B challenge that often gets an E solution, which appears to improve, but actually leaves residue for the long term. So I do have other webinars for educators and academics. You can email me if you're interested. I have a couple more for parents, for sports performance, and for getting ready for college. So I'm going to talk again about growth planning. You've seen this slide a couple times. I think I've got a couple more for you. You want a whole child approach because learning obstacles are rarely just one thing. And MBHE factors all interact all the time. They can work to spark growth, but they can also work to sabotage it. Children are developing future mind obstacles that they're going to have as teenagers, especially in motivation and self-esteem, by things that happen to B&H factors as kids. So what you see changes, but the underlying roots started early on. Again, we spend a lot of time treating E factors because they're easy to see and easy to test, and now, politically, schools get punished if they don't produce E factors. So there's a downside to growth planning, and first is that you're not going to find, well, you may have challenges finding local specialists who do this. I can tell you firsthand it's been a poor career move to decline insurance reimbursements. I can't give the type of support that I want to give at insurance reimbursement rates. My friends at Harvard and other universities tell me that there's limited research. Dr. Fisher, Dr. Peabody at Harvard do these things because they think it's the right thing to do, not because it's particularly career beneficial. You have the most to gain or to lose with growth planning, yet the families that are affected, the families that come to me, are already stretched so thin. And at some level, this is fairly unfair. It is rare that you're going to get invited to a growth community. So if you want a growth community, you're going to have to go out and create your own. Here's a case. Lawrence was a student. His mom was a reading specialist in elite school. She was personally invested in figuring him out and fixing him. She used medication. She promoted medication with her other students. Yet brute force and struggles and medication didn't work, and it ended up with the kid quitting sports. He disenrolled from this. He's in a good school now. It's not that he's out on the street, but it was part of his family's life story that they all went to this elite school, and now he's the first kid to let the family down, really through no fault of his own. So by taking a long-term view, brains are made to detect short-term threats, and so we wouldn't be alive if we didn't combat short-term threats. So if you want to take a long-term view, you're going to have to force your brain to invest the time to do it. It's clearly most important, but the short-term is more urgent, so it gets more brain time. Taking a long-term view, if teachers are pressuring you to do something, then you can give them an answer, say, this is what I'm doing. May not be exactly the medication choice they choose, but at least you're doing something. And taking a long-term, and parental guilt and parental energy are a big factor in this, and so being able to conserve your own energy and reserves and your spouse and your family is easier to do when you're in a long-term plan. When you're on a long-term plan and you hit a bump, that's a bump in your long-term plan. That's not a bump in forever. And so it does help. It sometimes make those obstacles are still difficult, but having a long-term plan in mind gives you a little bit more resilience to keep pushing ahead. Taking it step by step takes the pressure off mentally and in your community to find a cure. It's pretty clear there isn't a cure, but if you grow step by step, you can cover all the bases, and if it's not a medical illness, then there's not a medical cure. Most teachers, maybe not all, will celebrate that you're actually have put so much thought into this. And then strength building, again, like I say, happiness in the long term is more than the absence of emotional pain. And by focusing on strength, we increase students' resilience and autonomy. Autonomy protects against helplessness, and helplessness protects against depression. Strength building is more likely to create encounters with parents and kids that are win-win, that we're accomplishing this together, versus control issues that boil down to, I'm going to win and you're going to lose, and sometimes parents win, but as the parent of a teenager, I know that lots of times they win. And so pretty much every time I get into a confrontation, I know even if I win, I've lost, that I need to be able to reframe that issue into something that's win-win. I get this all the time. What's the best way to motivate my kid? Should I punish her? Should I reward her? Actually, the best way is not to have to, and so the fancy word is intrinsic motivation, and we know the steps that contribute to intrinsic motivation. And in our webinar on psychology of success, we talk about how we almost never do those for kids. So for you to get started with your growth plan, pick a framework. You can pick our option. You can do your own. Ours is $20 a month. It will require 20 to 30 minutes a week of weekly email exchange. We'll have more online workshops for you. It's unlikely you'll do this just on your own, so you're going to need to recruit allies, partly to hold you accountable because procrastination is your number one enemy, just like it was my number one enemy from 2013. I didn't do the things I needed to do to prepare for 2014, and now I'm suffering for it. This is kind of an explanation, but kind of a cop-out. I say that change is hard, and I just need to decide the cost of change versus the value of change. Your allies, your community, this is really important. First thing is that they're non-judgmental. You need help keeping perspective. It's very easy to get caught up in the trees and miss what's going on in the forest. Your allies have to always treat you not just physically safely, but emotionally safe. And if you don't feel like you can express yourself, it's going to be really hard for you to make progress, yet you don't want them to decide for you. You want them to tell you what you need to hear rather than what you want to hear. And this is actually kind of a tightrope, and typically mother-in-laws are not very good growth plan allies. Hope she's not listening to this. If your allies know about new research, that's a plus, or at least they can be willing to learn, and we'll send you some things to help them help you. You can hire us to be your growth coach one-on-one. It ranges from $300 to $500 a month, and we'll do bi-monthly or weekly Skype calls and walk you through. The one-on-one upgrade is more efficient in the first stage than doing email back and forth. If you can afford it, it's a good investment. But the email version works just fine if you have the patience for it. So when you're recruiting allies, don't do to them what I just did to you. Don't give them 25 reasons why the system is broken. Tell them what the benefits are. Tell them that you want to invest time now to save time in the future, that our kids are headed in a direction that they really don't deserve and that we want to do something about it. And even though we have one or many lemons right now, we need, for her sake, we need to find a way to make lemonades. Don't make them feel guilty. Invite them when they're ready. Because bottom line, even really bad parents still want, you can be in prison and still want your kids to be happy and healthy. So you can fine-tune your growth plan as you go along, and we'll jump through, since we're behind time, to you want to get past the pain point to gain, and the point when you start feeling liberated, and both you and your student, will be when you get through some of the pain points and getting up to the things that feel like gain. So let's take a few minutes, even though we're pretty short on time. Yes, we are. Let's run through these case studies. Staying positive in school, well good. So there's upbeat, I'm getting that right away. Thinking positive about herself. We've tried natural vitamins, diet changes, counseling. One comment I would have on that is that talking about feeling bad isn't going to make you get stronger. So to be stronger, to actually improve and to grow and to take a step-by-step growth approach, especially in B areas, especially in working memory and executive function, counseling is not going to help with that. And in fact, I have one client who is herself a psychotherapist, and she says in some ways she is worried about making things worse because they keep doing it. I mean, they keep coming back with the same roadblock, and it's good to express your feelings about it, but not unless you're actually fixing it, you're just going to keep coming back. Hard time focusing, has an IEP, may have ADD. So this family is following what most families do, and they're jumping and say, well, we need to find what the cure is. We've tried tutoring. It's kind of brute force, paying for brute force. Has an IEP. It's helping, but he's still behind. So I think this one can be adjusted really easily, and if the helping part is step by step and we're focusing on stronger, not easier, I'm okay if he's still behind as long as he's making progress and everyone feels comfortable that they're on track. See, next case, low self-esteem, repeated failures. Yeah, that's kind of heartbreaking, actually. Well, parents should, you should do these. You should encourage her. You should break tasks up into smaller time frames. But you need a bigger picture of why the repeated failures are happening. It's probably not just one thing. It's probably not just an H. Let me tell you about one thing that could be, in theory. I had a student who was moderately inattentive. He went away to summer camp. He came back, and he was a train wreck. We kept trying to work with him, and after a month we said, we just don't think this is a good use of your money. Mom went on her way. She called back 4 months later and said, Tom, guess what? He had Lyme disease. He got Lyme disease while he was camping from a tick bite. The antibodies don't show up for a period of time. There are just 2 labs in Kansas City that test for it. once they started treating that, then we were able to get back in and do our stuff. Medication works pretty well, so I would want to know how they're defining works pretty well. And yes, absolutely develop other skills. I tried tutoring, medication, private school, etc. So again, I mean, this really calls out for a growth plan because they're trying things without really understanding the components of what's causing the energy drain and the slow progress in school. So frustration comes, I presume they mean child frustration, comes from the energy drain and the slow progress. So if you can take care of some of those, I think you'll find frustration reducing. So my daughter and me are suffering from homework. Well, let's just guess she's in 8th, 9th, or 10th grade. Now the assignments are getting too hard for mom, which would happen for me. You should have seen my son's biology homework the other night. Yeah, so this is brute force. I presume they've been doing it. They need to find a way. Don't just abandon her right today because you saw this broadcast, but find some ways that you can build her own skills so she can do the work herself. Mom shouldn't have to go through 10th grade again. Getting ready to enter high school in the fall. I have an appointment. So this neuropsychologist is going to recommend medication and accommodations. And so I'm sorry to be so cynical about this, but if they test her, there are protocols for testing. It's very rare. I know a clinic in Vermont that does a fantastic job, but that's by far the exception rather than the rule. And finally, finding ways to help her enjoy learning, get the things we've done. You know what? I'm going to just assume for this case study that this is a 7 or 8-year-old, and I think this is just fine. I want her. Has natural curiosity and creativity. She's doing play and projects. If she's 7 or 8, she doesn't have to be reading and finishing math worksheets. Now, if she's 9 or 10, that's a problem, and so it's a different case depending on the age of the kid. But let's just assume that it's a 7-year-old, and mom feels pressured that she has to finish the state curriculum for homeschoolers. And I would just say push back on that. That if we're playing and getting projects done, she's learning when she's doing projects. She's learning when she's playing. She just hasn't learned the worksheets that a politician wants her to learn. So I think that part will be fine. So I hope I've left you with a trend to optimism, but also a more realistic picture. Again, we have other services other than just growth planning. And this product, it's affordable. There are no contracts. It's $20 a month. And we'd love to have you on our team. So I've run way over on time. I apologize for that. I see quite a few questions in the loop here. Let me just kind of spin through a couple of them if I can make this window bigger. Okay. Let's see. How to get in touch. Yes, I will send an email to everyone here, and with links to our getting started on the different programs. I'll send you copies of these slides and links to. I don't have all our other webinars up online yet, but I should have those soon. So eventually you'll get everything today that you've seen. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I've enjoyed talking to you electronically, and I hope we can work together very soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Yeah, wow. A ton of questions. So we got to work on a little time as usual. Yeah, we have a lot of questions to take care of. So I'll export those down and get working on it. Oops, left the button.